It's great that the world is concerned about the human rights of people in Afghanistan, but where have you been? Literally, where have you been for the last 20 years? The war on terror has gone on longer than World War I and World War II put together. It has touched 85 countries. It has led to the death of civil liberties within the countries that launched it. This was a war of choice. When the United States announced that they wanted Osama bin Laden, the government in Afghanistan were quite clear. They were willing to provide him to be judged in a court of law. The United States were not even happy for him to go to The Hague. They wanted military action. Did that have something to do with the fact that within George Bush's administration, there were 6 senior executives at Lockheed Martin, a company which has benefited massively from the war on terror? This war, which has lasted 2 decades, has entailed the costs of about $6.4 trillion. The Afghan war has cost not only almost 250,000 lives, but it cost the US government $2.26 trillion. The US spent trillions, and where did it go? It went into the bank accounts of some of the most wealthiest people in the world.
Some people call you the elite. I call you my base.
It went to Dick Cheney's Halliburton. It went to Eric Prince, formerly of Blackwater.
Would you be profiting from the war?
Well, we're not there now, but any vendor that solves that solution, that's capitalism. That's what it's about.
Blackwater killed many civilians in Iraq and were captured on camera doing so. It went into Veritas Capital, the second largest military contractor in Iraq. In Afghanistan, it owns DynCorp. DynCorp employees were hiring child prostitutes within Afghanistan. It went to Lockheed Martin, who within days of the announcement of the Afghan war got one of the largest no-bid contracts in US history. This war, as it always is, was a transfer of wealth upwards. Robin Hood in reverse. That money could have been better spent housing people, giving people their own human rights here. Do not allow the war industry to lead you to believe otherwise.
The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite.
The Afghan war logs, for which Julian Assange seems to be paying the price with his life today in a cold cell, revealed torture, death squads, rendition, individual killings, group killings.
This is the whole context, with some exceptions, of the Afghan war.
These are some of the
unknowns
that Donald Rumsfeld spoke about. Another person who has done much to reveal them is Daniel Hale, who showed that 90% of victims of the US drone program were actually innocent bystanders. Daniel Hale has paid the price and will be sent to jail on the charge of espionage. So at a time where we have seen the main patriarchs of the war on terror, George Bush and Tony Blair, relentlessly rehabilitated and in fact oracleized, we simultaneously see those who have revealed the war crimes of these war criminals demonized, imprisoned and ignored completely. This is how they monsterize the humans and humanize the monsters. Overall, the war on terror is believed to have caused 37 million refugees. When we look at the war on terror as a force of displacement across the world, the very same governments that are involved in these NATO campaigns are also preventing people seeking asylum in their countries.
We need to ensure that we are protected from a large-scale influx that can have detrimental effects.
35,000 people and over have died trying to get into Europe over the last 30 years. The Afghans that have died following their displacement and attempt to enter the EU include Reza Ibrahimi, a 15-year-old child who died in the camp in Lesbos on the 25th of August 2019. Amin Allah and Iftikhar, 18-year-old boys who both died under a freight train trying to get into Europe on the 7th of June 2019? Or what about Ali Reza, the 18-year-old who took his own life in Geneva in a shelter for unaccompanied minors on the 27th of March 2019? These governments are making it as difficult as physically possible for people from countries like Afghanistan to reach a safe haven. Contrary to this entirely manufactured but seemingly widespread and popular view that actually you help people by invading and bombing them, the truth is you help people by not interfering in their affairs, by learning from history and providing safe passage to asylum. You help people by not haranguing those who rescue people in the sea struggling for life.
Extraordinary morning we're having on the water, Kate. Just take a look.
How many of you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 men who are on the dinghy. Where are you from?
You help people by not sending journalists to interrogate them in their most desperate moments within the sea. You help people by not demonizing them on the front of newspapers owned by unaccountable offshore capital like Rupert Murdoch. You have no benefit in believing in their lies of vertical solidarity and horizontal hatred. You have more in common with the people fleeing the bombs paid for by you than you do with the people dropping the bombs paid for by you. When you look at the history of Afghanistan and the way in which it is intertwined with the history of this country, you are talking about a place which has been the subject of British war 4 times in the last 2 centuries. Starting in 1839, when General Keane marched into Kabul with 10,000 troops, the British did not achieve their objectives and were forced to leave in a humiliating march of doom. In fact, 100 years ago, in 1919, it was the first country in the world to drop bombs on Afghanistan. 332 bombs in 1 single day. Britain should never have been there, and it should never go back ever again.
Why do you feel it so personally, Mr. Wallace?
Because I'm a soldier. Because it's sad, and the West has done what it's done. And we have to do our very best, Nick, to get people out and stand by our obligations. And 20 years of sacrifice is what it is.
Ben Wallace. He was the overseas director of Kinetic, an arms company which benefited handsomely from the occupation of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not the property of the United States and the UK. It is time that people in the US and Britain understood that they have no right to dictate who can or can't be the government of any other country. This idea of liberation through occupation exists only in the imagination of MOD-influenced journalists. Maybe now is not the time for the deep contemplative think pieces in somber tones from the people that marched us into this. Now is the time in which those of us who campaigned year after year against these industrial massacres to be clearly understood to have been vindicated, even within your own tortured logic in the service of power, you have failed. Now is the time for humility and accountability on the part of the warmongers and hope for the rest of us.
Billions of pounds have been spent. Hundreds of British soldiers have died. Hundreds of soldiers from other coalition forces have died. And thousands upon thousands of Afghan civilians and soldiers have also died. For what? For whom? For what purpose in the long run?
Good riddance to the war on terror. 20 years of pain, suffering, and misery which could have been avoided. This time of threat inflation and overstated danger has to come to an end. You have 1 in 16 million chance of being anywhere near an act of political violence in this country. Why is it that all of this money has gone into fighting something that your chances of dying in are infinitesimal. Far more people are dying because of climate change and pollution than they are because of terrorism. It is a well-documented fact that the United States military is a bigger polluter than 140 countries and spends more than the next 7 countries put together on its military budget. Therefore, the US military is a bigger threat to you and to Afghans than the Taliban could ever be. Our future cannot be defined by warfare and enemies. We have to find a way in which humanity can come together to survive the major destabilization which climate change will bring. Yes, people, support Double Down News, join the Patreon if you want to see more videos like this, if you want to encourage independent media which is not beholden to the MOD and major corporate power. Join the future of journalism, join Double Down News on Patreon.